Welcome everyone. It is so good to be with you here on Tuesday's Deep Well. We are going to tackle a subject I think that every single one of us have had to deal with at one time or another, and probably many of us are struggling with some issue related to it right now. In other words, maybe a circumstance, maybe an individual, or maybe even something with ourselves. And what could that possibly be? It's that issue of forgiveness. Forgiveness of ourselves, forgiveness of other people, forgiveness of things that we've been wronged in where we just can't seem to release it. And so we're going to take and tackle this today in the fourth discourse of Matthew, which those chapters actually are 18 through 20, but we're going to stay in just a small segment of 18 today because it was important for Jesus to, as he was talking about the covenantal community of family that he was wanting us to know how to operate in, he brought up forgiveness right out of the chute in that discipleship lesson he was teaching his followers. And so let us jump into it as well. He starts out by saying, if your brother sins against you, as he's talking to those disciples, and then he gives a three-step process. And the three-step process is you go to that individual privately and you tell them where they've sinned. If they choose to ignore you, if they choose to not do anything about it, then he goes to the step 2 with 2 or 3 people now coming. And if that is rebuffed, then he brings the church body together. And at that point in time, he says, and then if that's the case, then treat them as a Gentile or a tax collector, meaning they then are not a part of the congregation. Now, some people will say we cut them off from the congregation. That's really not what it is. It really is a letting them go. Because if you're to a situation where a whole church body is against an act, something that someone is doing that is viewed as a sin, and you have that level of agreement, then that person isn't participating in the partnership, fellowship of that church anyway. And so what we do is we let them go. Now it's interesting, and this is something that I did prior to even getting on with you, is because we're talking about forgiveness, we're going to see how important it is to Jesus as we continue to go along. I wanted to take a minute on my own to just pause a minute, which I'm going to ask you to do now. Just pause a minute, and I want you to just lift up to the Lord if there's someone on your heart that comes to mind, that you see maybe an image of them that you need to forgive. Even talking about the word forgiveness, it may have already come up to you. Oh yeah, that one I'm still holding on, or I just ended up dealing with something with them today and I'm really having a difficult time getting over it. Let's just pause a minute and ask the Lord if he has someone that he wants you to deal with. Because we're going to be showing God's heart, Jesus' heart, about forgiveness and the importance that he places on it. You know, it's an interesting thing. I was teaching in a young adult class, and there were different people there. We were opening up the discussion about it, and I posed that very question to them. I said, let's just go silent for a little bit. Now, these were people that had actively pursued forgiving other people in the past, and I knew that. But I asked them again just to make sure that as we were continuing on in this teaching, we'd covered all of our bases. Well, guess what happened? There were more than one. There were some multiples that ended up saying, you know what? I thought I had forgiven that person, but I have not. One person said, I've walked through this now about 3 times, and I kept thinking that I had forgiven them, and I had not. So we identified what the block was. We identified the lie that the enemy was trying to help that person hold on to so they would not forgive. And we got past that, and there was true forgiveness of that individual. So this is something that's important for all of us and something that we need to continue to stay current in. So with that being said, if you have somebody that's come to mind, just write it down, make a quick note of it, and then we can go through and you can deal with it in your prayer time with the Lord. So this is what we're talking about right now as we're part of going through this forgiveness, that in the word in Matthew 18, as Jesus went through that, the whole goal in this is reconciliation. See, Jesus wants us to be ministers of reconciliation, and we're going to talk about that maybe later, but the goal is always the reconciliation. And reconciliation doesn't mean capitulation. I mean, you just don't give in to something that is wrong. But it's helping to grow each of us up in understanding, according to the word, how to walk this out and contend with one another, because the Lord places such great emphasis on unity of the body. Let's just take a minute. We can understand that, I think, even more deeply. See, if you're in a situation, well, let's just take the body. In the body, if those of you all who have studied the word know who the head is Christ. So his body is all the rest of us. Can you imagine a body that's always doing this fighting against one another? Like one part's fighting against the other, one part's rebelling against another? I mean, what kind of healthy body would that be? And Christ is the head over that body. We are connected to him. So it is our responsibility and our obligation to walk in obedience to this process. So first off, let's take a look at really what do we see here, what Christ is teaching. Well, the first thing is, as we continue on, Christ actually goes through and has a discussion with Peter, and I'm going to just mention it briefly. But Peter, I think, is like getting kind of excited, and he says, how often should we forgive, Jesus? 7 times? And Jesus says, 70 times 7. And to me, just that saying alone, coming back to Peter the way he did, says, my heart is for you all to walk into unity. That you esteem that, you put that as an utmost priority. How do we know that? Because Jesus tells us, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. That means we forgive ourselves and we forgive others so that we can freely love them with that moral righteousness that just builds family unity. So that's the first thing. And the second one is this. A lot of people get confused on this issue. It doesn't mean that we have to become friends with them. It may be that there has been something that has been very, very difficult, and maybe there's been some trust broke. And when that happens, it doesn't mean that suddenly we have to do a bunch of social activities and all with them, but you will know in your heart if you still carry offense. And I think in seeing and understanding that we all have been forgiven much, we all have the need of the cross. We all have to step into the fullness of the package of the cross that produces inner healing in us, just as it will produce inner healing in others. So thankfully, we can release even those things that seem like atrocities, like things that are hard to even hear happen to one another. It seems that the Lord reminds us that there's nothing that we go through that he has not walked through already. And he is the judge. So we release it into him, trusting that his judgment is the one that carries the weight, and it will be righteous, and it will be filled with justice. And so let's just take a look at those this week. Let's look at and walk through thinking about the cross, thinking about what the price is that Jesus paid, thinking about all that he has forgiven us of, and then walking that through in our proactive forgiveness of one another. So I just hope that this has been of value to you. Open up your Bibles and just read that section in Matthew 18. Matthew 18 is so beautiful when it comes to sharing this, giving us the protocols for the church environment, our family environment, and also in response to Jesus's call on us to walk in unity and love with one another. So please subscribe to the Deep Well, and we will see you next Tuesday. Until then, have a blessed week.